Welcome back to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient worlds come to life in the gentle embrace of twilight. I'm your narrator, and tonight we're embarking on a very special journey together. For those of you just joining our circle of dreamers, this is where we explore the forgotten corners of human history, not as scholars in dusty libraries, but as travelers seeking the profound stories that connect us all across time. Here at Mystic Bedtime Stories, we believe that the most powerful tales aren't always found in fiction, but in the real mysteries of our past. Each week, we illuminate civilizations that have whispered their secrets across millennia, waiting patiently for someone to listen with both mind and heart. Tonight, we're answering one of history's most intriguing calls. So settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea in your most comfortable spot. Dim the lights if you wish. Let the weight of the day slowly lift from your shoulders as we prepare to step back in time together. Whether you're here to learn, to relax, or simply to let your imagination wander, you're exactly where you need to be. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this with me. The year is somewhere around 1200 BCE, though such numbers mean little in the place we're traveling to tonight. The sun is setting over the coastal lowlands of what we now call southern Mexico, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that seem to pulse with an ancient heartbeat. Here, where the Gulf of Mexico meets endless expanses of wetlands and tropical forests, the air itself feels different. It's thick with moisture and mystery, heavy with the scent of rich earth and flowering vines. The sound of your footsteps would be muffled by the soft ground beneath, a landscape that seems to breathe with each gentle breeze that stirs the massive cecropia trees and towering palms. This is a world where water and land dance together in an eternal embrace. Rivers snake lazily through verdant plains, their dark waters reflecting not just the sky above, but something deeper, something that speaks of civilizations yet to be, born and others already ancient beyond memory. The very ground here holds secrets, layers upon layers of human stories, pressed into the fertile earth like pages in a book written in soil and stone. As twilight deepens, you might hear the distant call of a howler monkey echoing across the canopy, a sound so primal it seems to carry the voice of the earth itself. Closer, the gentle splash of a fish jumping in one of the countless waterways, or the soft rustle of a jaguar moving through the undergrowth with the silent grace that has made it a symbol of power for thousands of years. But tonight, we're not here alone. If you listen carefully, beyond the natural symphony of this ancient landscape, you might catch something else. The faint echo of human voices, the whisper of feet on pathways worn smooth by countless generations, the distant rhythm of ceremonial drums that once called communities together under stars that shone just as brightly then as they do now. This is the world of the Olmecs, though they never called themselves by that name. The word Olmec comes from the Aztecs, spoken over 1,000 years later, meaning rubber people for the latex they harvested from these very forests. But the people we're about to meet knew themselves by other names now lost to time, names that carried the weight of their identity, their connection to this land, and their understanding of their place in the great wheel of existence. In the growing darkness, imagine catching a glimpse of light in the distance. Not the harsh glare of modern illumination, but the warm, flickering glow of fires tended by human hands. As you move closer, the landscape begins to reveal its secrets. What first appeared to be natural hills rising from the swampland slowly resolve into something far more extraordinary. These are not hills at all, but massive earthen platforms, constructed with a precision that speaks of advanced engineering and profound purpose. Some rise 30 feet or more above the surrounding wetlands, their sides perfectly sloped, their surfaces carefully maintained. Atop these monumental foundations stand structures that seem to bridge the gap between earth and sky, between the physical world and the realm of spirits. The people who built these marvels lived here for over 1,000 years, creating the foundation upon which all later Mesoamerican civilizations would build. They were the first to conceive of monumental architecture in this part of the world, the first to develop complex systems of trade that stretched from the Pacific to the Atlantic, the first to create art that captured not just the physical world, but the spiritual forces they believed animated all of existence. As we stand here in this imagined twilight, surrounded by the whispers of the ancient forest, we're about to embark on a journey that will take us deep into one of humanity's most fascinating and mysterious chapters. We'll walk among people who could transport massive stones across hundreds of miles without the wheel, who created sculptures so lifelike they seem ready to speak, who developed mathematical and astronomical knowledge that would influence civilizations for millennia too. Come. But perhaps most remarkably, we'll discover a people who left behind no written records as we understand them, no chronicles of kings and conquests, no detailed accounts of their daily lives. Instead, they spoke to the future through stone and jade, through carefully arranged earthworks and precisely carved monuments, through a language of symbols and images they were still learning to read. The Olmecs were master storytellers, but they carved their tales in volcanic rock and precious green stone rather than on paper or clay tablets. They were astronomers who built their observations into the very foundations of their cities. They were artists who infused their creations with spiritual power. They were traders who connected distant peoples and shared ideas across vast distances. They were engineers who reshaped the landscape itself to serve their vision of how humans should live in harmony with the forces of nature. Tonight, as we settle into our exploration of their world, we're not just learning about ancient history. We're connecting with people who faced many of the same fundamental questions that we do today. How do we live in balance with our environment? How do we organize our communities to serve both individual needs and collective good? How do we express our deepest beliefs and pass them on to future generations? How do we find meaning in the face of life's great mysteries? The Olmecs found their answers in the humid lowlands of Mesoamerica, in a world where the boundary between physical and spiritual was as permeable as the morning mist that still rises. From these ancient swamplands, their solutions were uniquely their own, shaped by their environment, their beliefs, and their remarkable creative genius. Yet in their story, we might find reflections of our own eternal human journey. So as we prepare to meet these remarkable people, let yourself sink a little deeper into comfort. Let your breathing slow to match the gentle rhythm of this ancient place. The Olmecs are waiting to share their secrets with us, and they have so much to tell. Their story is one of innovation and mystery, of profound spiritual insight and practical ingenuity, of a people who lived so fully in their own time that their influence echoes still across the centuries. The forest is settling into its evening quiet now, and somewhere in the distance, barely audible above the gentle symphony of insects and night birds, we can almost hear the sound of ceremonial conch shells calling across the darkness, just as they did over 3,000 years ago. The Olmecs are ready to speak to us through the monuments they left behind, through the art they created, through the very landscape they shaped with their vision and their hands. Are you ready to listen? Are you ready to step back across the centuries and meet the people who gave birth to Mesoamerican civilization itself? Then let us begin this journey together, following pathways worn smooth by countless feet, toward the heart of one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. In the gentle darkness of this ancient world, illuminated only by starlight and the distant glow of ceremonial fires, the story of the Olmecs is about to unfold. As the first light of dawn breaks over the coastal plains of ancient Mesoamerica, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of one of history's most captivating mysteries. The people we call the Olmecs emerge from the mists of time like figures, walking out of a dream, their true names lost to us, their voices silent for over 2 millennia. yet their presence so powerful that it shaped the destiny of an entire continent. Picture, if you will, the moment when the first European archaeologists stumbled upon massive stone heads buried in the jungle soil of Tabasco and Veracruz. Imagine their wonder, their confusion, as they brushed centuries of earth away from features so distinctly human, so remarkably preserved, that they seemed to have been carved only yesterday. These were not the weathered remains of some forgotten monument, but faces that gazed back at their discoverers with an intensity that suggested souls still dwelling within the stone. Who were these master sculptors? Who were the people capable of such artistry, such engineering prowess in an age when much of the world was still learning to work iron? The answer unfolds like a flower blooming in slow motion across the span of centuries, revealing a civilization that was, in many ways, unlike any other in human history. The Olmecs flourished during what archaeologists call the formative period of Mesoamerican history, roughly from 1600 to 400 years before the birth of Christ. To put this in perspective, they were already building monumental architecture when the Great Pyramids of Giza were still relatively new, when Troy was just beginning to rise to prominence in the ancient Mediterranean, when much of Europe remained in the Bronze Age. But dates and periods, while helpful for scholars, hardly capture the essence of who these people were. The Olmecs were innovators in the truest sense, not because they sought novelty for its own sake, but because they possessed a unique vision of how human beings could live in harmony with both the natural world and the realm of the divine. Looked at the swamplands and forests of the Gulf Coast and saw not obstacles to overcome, but partners in creation. In their world, every element of the landscape held meaning and power. Rivers were not simply sources of water and transportation, but sacred arteries carrying the lifeblood of the earth itself. Mountains were not mere geographical features, but dwelling places of spirits and ancestors. Even the humble cecropia tree, with its distinctive palmate leaves, carried symbolic weight in their cosmology, representing the connection between earth and sky. The Olmecs understood themselves to be participants in a vast, interconnected web of relationships that included not only other human beings, but animals, plants, stones, rivers, and celestial bodies. This understanding shaped everything. They created, from the grandest ceremonial center to the smallest jade figurine. Nothing was merely decorative or functional in their world. Everything served multiple purposes, existing simultaneously in the physical realm and the spiritual dimension. Their society was remarkably sophisticated, organized around ceremonial centers that served as focal points for both religious observance and practical governance. These were not cities in the way we might imagine them today, with dense populations living in close quarters. Instead, they were carefully planned complexes of pyramids, plazas, and specialized buildings, surrounded by smaller settlements scattered across the landscape. Like stars around a bright center dot, the people themselves lived in harmony with the rhythms of their environment. During the dry season, they might gather in larger numbers at ceremonial centers for festivals and markets. During the rainy season, many would disperse to smaller communities, tending crops and maintaining the intricate network of relationships that held their society together. This was not the rigid hierarchy of some ancient civilizations, but a more fluid, adaptive way of organizing human community. What made the Olmecs truly extraordinary was their role as cultural innovators for all of Mesoamerica. They were the first to develop many of the ideas and practices that would later be adopted and refined by the Maya, the Zapotecs, the people of Teotihuacan, and eventually the Aztecs. The concept of the feathered serpent, one of the most enduring symbols in Mesoamerican religion, first appeared in Olmec art. The ritual ball game, played throughout the region for thousands of years, seems to have originated with the Olmecs. Even the complex calendar systems that allowed later civilizations to track time with remarkable precision can trace their roots back to Olmec innovations. Yet for all their influence on later cultures, the Olmecs remain tantalizingly mysterious. To us, they left no written chronicles, no detailed accounts of their rulers or their conquests. Instead, they communicated across time through a language of images and symbols, through carefully arranged stones and precisely calculated architectural alignments. They were master storytellers who chose to write in materials more permanent than paper or clay, creating narratives that have survived for over 3 millennia. This is what makes our journey with them tonight so special. We're not following the conventional path of political history, tracking the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms. Instead, we're reading a different kind of story, one written in the landscape itself, in the placement of monuments, in the symbolic relationships between different elements of their artistic and architectural vocabulary. The Olmecs invite us to see history, not as a series of events marching in linear progression, but as a tapestry of relationships, influences, and adaptations. They show us how innovation happens not in isolation, but through the patient accumulation of knowledge, the careful observation of natural patterns, and the willingness to experiment with new ways of expressing ancient truths. As we prepare to explore their great ceremonial centers, to walk among their colossal sculptures, to decode the symbols they carved in jade and basalt, we're embarking on a journey that will change how we think about creativity, community, and the relationship between human beings and the natural world. The Olmecs are waiting to share their wisdom with us, and they have so much to teach about living with intention, creating with purpose, and leaving a legacy that endures long after our voices have fallen silent. In the soft light of this ancient dawn, with mist rising from the rivers and the calls of tropical birds beginning their daily symphony, we can almost see them now. These remarkable people who chose to speak to the future through stone and symbol rather than conquest and chronicling. They are ready to tell us their story, if we are ready to listen with both our minds and our hearts. As the morning mist begins to lift from the wetlands, revealing the contours of the ancient landscape, we find ourselves approaching something that defies everything we thought we knew about early human settlement. Rising from what appears to be flat swampland, enormous earthen mounds stretch toward the sky, their surfaces covered in a carpet of green that speaks of centuries of patient growth. These are not natural formations, though they seem to belong so perfectly to this environment that nature herself might have dreamed them into existence. Welcome to San Lorenzo, the earliest of the great Olmec ceremonial centers, a place where human vision first transformed the landscape of Mesoamerica on a monumental scale. Imagine standing here around 1150 BCE, when this complex was at the height of its power and influence. The massive platform on which you stand was not built in a single generation, but grew slowly over decades, each layer representing the collective effort of thousands of people working together toward a shared vision. San Lorenzo was more than a city in our modern understanding. It was a sacred landscape, carefully designed to reflect the Olmec understanding of cosmic order. The main platform, stretching over half a mile in length, was oriented to capture the movements of celestial bodies, its edges aligned with the rising and setting points of significant stars. From its elevated surface, ceremonial leaders could observe the heavens and mark the passage of seasons, ensuring that agricultural activities and religious observances remained in harmony with the greater rhythms of the universe. The engineering required to create such a monument staggers the imagination. Workers moved millions of cubic feet of earth, carrying it basket by basket from quarries scattered across the surrounding landscape. They built sophisticated drainage systems to manage the flow of water during the rainy season, creating a network of stone-lined channels that still function today, over 3 millennia later. They imported massive basalt boulders from volcanic sources 60 miles away, transporting them without wheeled vehicles through dense jungle and across multiple rivers. But perhaps most remarkably, They did all of this without the coercive power structures that we associate with other ancient civilizations. There is no evidence of slave labor at San Lorenzo, no signs of the massive inequality that characterized the building of Egypt's pyramids or Mesopotamia's ziggurats. Instead, the archaeological record suggests society based on consensus and its shared purpose, where participation in monumental construction was seen as a form of spiritual practice, a way of connecting with the divine forces that governed the world. As San Lorenzo began to decline around 900 BCE, the center of Olmec civilization shifted southeast to La Venta, a site that would become perhaps the most sophisticated of all their ceremonial complexes. La Venta rose on a small island in the Fizi, middle of a vast wetland, its isolation adding to its mystique and spiritual power. Here, the Olmecs refined their architectural vision, creating structures that seemed to anticipate the great pyramid complexes of later Mesoamerican civilizations. The centerpiece of La Venta was a massive clay pyramid, rising 100 feet above the surrounding landscape. Unlike the stone pyramids of Egypt or the later monuments of Teotihuacan, this was built entirely of colored earth, carefully selected and layered to create a structure that seemed to glow with internal light when struck by the setting sun. The pyramid was surrounded by a precisely planned complex of plazas, smaller mounds, and specialized buildings, all arranged according to principles that balanced practical needs with spiritual symbolism. Walking through La Venta in its prime, around 600 BCE, you would have encountered a landscape that felt alive with meaning. Every plaza served multiple purposes, functioning as gathering spaces for ceremonial activities, markets for trade, and theaters for the performance of sacred dramas. The positioning of buildings created sightlines that directed attention toward significant astronomical events, while the arrangement of water features and gardens provided spaces for meditation and reflection. The people of La Venta were master hydraulic engineers, creating an elaborate system of aqueducts and reservoirs that not only supplied fresh water to the complex, but also enhanced its spiritual significance. Water was considered sacred by the Olmecs, representing both the life-giving power of the earth and the fluid boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds. The sound of flowing water provided a constant backdrop to daily life at La Venta, a gentle reminder of the forces that sustained all existence. As we move forward in time, we encounter Tres Zapotes, the longest-lived of the great Olmec centers, which continued to flourish long after the decline of San Lorenzo and La Venta. Tres Zapotes represents the mature expression of Olmec urban planning, a place where earlier innovations were refined and new ideas were born. It was here that the Olmecs developed some of their most sophisticated approaches to recording time and tracking celestial movements, creating systems that would influence Mesoamerican astronomy for centuries to come. What makes these three centers so remarkable is not just their individual achievements, but the network of relationships they created across the landscape. They were connected by a complex system of waterways and overland routes that facilitated trade, communication, and the sharing of ideas. Goods flowed between them along with people, creating a dynamic cultural exchange that enriched all three communities. The residents of these centers were not isolated from the surrounding countryside, but maintained intimate connections with smaller settlements scattered throughout the region. During certain seasons, the populations of the ceremonial centers would swell as people gathered for festivals and markets. During other times, many residents would disperse to smaller communities, maintaining the agricultural and craft production that sustained the entire network. This seasonal rhythm of concentration and dispersal created a unique form of urban life, one that remained connected to the natural cycles of the environment, while supporting the complex social and religious institutions that made Olmec civilization possible. It was a model of sustainable development that allowed these communities to flourish for over a millennium, without exhausting their environmental resources or creating unsustainable social tensions. As twilight approaches and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, we can imagine the ceremonial fires being lit in the plazas of these ancient centers, their flickering light creating a warm glow that connected earth to heaven. In that light, the Olmecs gathered to share stories, to celebrate their achievements, and to plan for the future, never knowing that their innovative approach to urban life would influence civilizations yet to be born. The great centers of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes stand as monuments to human creativity and cooperation, proof that our ancestors were capable of achievements that continue to inspire us today. They remind us that the most enduring human accomplishments are not built through force or conquest, but through the patient work of communities united by shared vision and mutual respect. In the gathering dusk of our ancient world, as shadows lengthen across the ceremonial plazas, our attention is drawn to the most enigmatic and powerful of all Olmec creations. Standing silent in the fading light, massive beyond comprehension, are the colossal heads that have puzzled and inspired humanity for generations. These are not mere sculptures, but presences, entities carved from volcanic stone that seem to possess souls of their own. Imagine encountering one of these monuments for the first time, as archaeologists did in the dense jungles of Tabasco over a century ago. Picture yourself pushing through the thick undergrowth, following rumors of strange stones hidden beneath centuries of accumulated earth and vegetation. Suddenly, your machete strikes something harder than root or rock. You brush away the dirt, expecting to find another fragment of pottery or perhaps a small carved ornament. Instead, you find yourself looking into eyes that seem to look back. The first sensation is one of scale. These heads are enormous, some standing over 10 feet tall and weighing as much as 40 tons. They are carved from single blocks of basalt, a volcanic rock so hard that it would challenge modern power tools. Yet the Olmecs shaped it with stone implements and infinite patience. The precision of their work defies explanation. Every curve of the lips, every fold of the eyelids, every detail of what appear to be elaborate headdresses is rendered with a realism that makes the faces seem alive. But it is not just their size or craftsmanship that makes these heads so compelling. It is their expressions, their individuality, their unmistakable humanity. Each face is unique, clearly representing a specific person rather than an idealized type. Some appear stern and authoritative, their eyes gazing into the distance with the weight of great responsibility. Others seem more approachable, their features suggesting wisdom tempered with compassion. A few appear almost to be smiling, as if they possess some secret knowledge that brings them joy even across the centuries. Who were these individuals? The question has haunted researchers since the first head was discovered, and the mystery only deepens as we learn more about them. 17 colossal heads have been found so far, scattered across the major Olmec sites. Each bears the distinctive features that we have come to recognize as characteristically Olmec, with broad noses, full lips, and eyes that seem to hold depths of ancient wisdom. Yet within these shared characteristics, each face tells its own story. The craftsmanship required to create these monuments staggers the imagination. The basalt from which they were carved came from volcanic sources in the Tuxtla Mountains, some of them over 60 miles from where the finished heads were eventually placed. Moving such massive blocks of stone across rivers, through swamps, and over rough terrain without wheeled vehicles or large domesticated animals represents an engineering feat that equals anything achieved by other ancient civilizations. But the physical challenges of transporting and carving the stone pale in comparison to the artistic vision required to create such masterpieces. Each head required months, perhaps years, of careful work by master sculptors who understood not only the technical aspects of stone carving but also the spiritual significance of their task. These were not merely decorative objects, but sacred monuments, vessels for spiritual power that required both artistic skill and ritual knowledge to create properly. The process of carving would have been a community event, drawing observers and participants from across the region. Picture the scene. Skilled artisans working with stone tools, carefully removing layer after layer of rock to reveal the face hidden within. The sound of hammering would have echoed across the ceremonial center, a rhythmic percussion that marked the slow emergence of a new spiritual presence. Children would have gathered to watch, learning not just the techniques of stone carving, but the deeper meanings embedded in the work dot as each head neared completion. The excitement would have grown. The moment when the eyes were finally opened, when the mouth was given its final shape, when the headdress received its last decorative touches, would have been marked by ceremony and celebration. For the Olmecs understood that they were not simply creating art, but participating in an act of spiritual creation, bringing new life into the world through their skill and devotion. The question of who these faces represent has generated numerous theories over the decades. Some scholars suggest they are portraits of rulers, powerful leaders, whose authority needed to be made manifest in permanent form. The elaborate headdresses that many wear certainly suggest high status, and the careful individualization of features implies that these were real people, not mythological figures or generic representations of power. Others propose that the heads represent accomplished ball players, heroes of the ritual sport that was so central to Olmec culture. The helmets that some appear to wear could be protective headgear used in the ball game, and the strength and dignity of the faces would be appropriate for celebrating athletic champions who had achieved quasi-divine status through their skill and bravery. Still others suggest a more spiritual interpretation. Perhaps these are portraits of shamans or priests, individuals who serve as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. Their serene expressions and the sense of inner power they convey would be fitting for those who had achieved high levels of spiritual development and were venerated for their wisdom and connection to sacred forces. The truth may encompass elements of all these theories. Olmec society, like many ancient cultures, probably did not make rigid distinctions between political, athletic, and spiritual leadership. A ruler might also be an accomplished ball player and a skilled shaman. The colossal heads could represent individuals who embodied multiple forms of excellence, whose influence extended across all aspects of community life. What we can say with certainty is that these monuments represent the Olmec understanding of human dignity and potential. Unlike the anonymous masses depicted in the art of some ancient civilizations, these faces celebrate individuality while maintaining connection to shared cultural values. They suggest a society that valued personal achievement while recognizing that true greatness comes from service to the community and alignment with spiritual principles. The heads also demonstrate the Olmec mastery of what we might call monumental psychology. They were designed not just to be seen, but to be experienced, to create specific emotional and spiritual responses in those who encountered them. Their size commands respect, even awe, while their humanity invites contemplation and connection. They manage to be both intimidating and approachable, distant and intimate, eternal and profoundly present. Standing before one of these heads today, even in a museum setting far from their original context, we can still feel something of their original power. They remind us that the creation of art is one of humanity's most distinctive achievements, a way of reaching across time to share our deepest understanding of what it means to be human. The unknown sculptors who created these masterpieces succeeded in their ultimate goal. They made themselves and their subjects immortal, ensuring that their vision of human dignity and potential would continue to inspire people thousands of years. After their own voices fell silent thought as night settles over the ancient ceremonial centers, and the colossal heads stand watch in the darkness, their stone eyes reflecting the light of ceremonial fires we can almost hear the whispers of their creators. The patient artisans who understood that they were creating something far more significant than mere sculpture. They were crafting vessels for the human spirit, monuments to the belief that individual achievement and community purpose could be unified in works of lasting beauty and power. The morning mist clings to the ancient wetlands of southern Mexico, where time itself began to whisper its secrets. Here, beneath the canopy of cecropia trees and alongside the meandering rivers, the Olmec people discovered something profound that would echo through the centuries. They learned to capture time, to hold it in their hands like precious jade, and to speak with symbols that carried the weight of God's dot in the quiet hours before dawn. When the world holds its breath between night and day, imagine an Olmec astronomer standing atop one of their earthen pyramids. The stars above him tell stories written in a language older than words, and he has learned to read their ancient script. His fingers trace patterns in the soft clay, marking the passage of days, the rhythm of seasons, the eternal dance between earth and sky. The Olmec were among the first in the Americas to understand that time moves in circles, not lines. They watched the sun rise and set, counted the days between new moons, observed the subtle shift of stars across the seasonal sky. From these observations, they crafted a calendar system that would become the foundation for all Mesoamerican timekeeping. It is believed that the Olmecs utilized a calendar based on a 365-day solar year, similar to the calendar systems later adopted by the Maya and other Mesoamerican cultures. Picture the sacred calendar emerging from the wisdom of generations. Olmec divided their year into 18 months of 20 days each, with 5 additional days that carried special significance. These final days were considered dangerous, a time when the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. During these liminal days, the people would fast, pray, and perform ceremonies to ensure the safe passage into the new year. But this was more than mere timekeeping. The calendar was a living entity, breathing with the rhythm of the cosmos. Each day carried its own spiritual energy, its own relationship to the divine forces that governed human fate. The Olmec priests, keepers of this sacred knowledge, could read the patterns of time like a river flowing through the landscape of existence, dot in the pre-dawn darkness. Imagine these priests gathered around flickering torches, their faces painted with symbols that mirrored the markings they carved in stone. They spoke in hushed tones of the long count, a method of tracking time that could measure vast spans of years. This calendar system was probably developed by the Olmecs and later adopted by the Maya. It was a way of understanding humanity's place in the grand cosmic story, connecting the brief flicker of human life to the eternal cycles of creation and destruction. The calculation of time required symbols, and here the Olmec made another revolutionary leap. The Olmec may have been the first civilization in the Western Hemisphere to develop a writing system. From the swirling mists of the Gulf Coast emerged humanity's first attempt in the Americas to capture thought itself in permanent form. The symbols they created were not arbitrary marks, but living representations of the world around them. The block features linear arrangements of certain characters that appear to be ancient depictions of tribal objects, such as animals, insects, tools, and food, especially corn. Each glyph carried multiple layers of meaning, weaving together the practical and the sacred, the earthly and the divine. Consider the moment when an Olmec scribe first pressed a symbol into wet clay, transforming a fleeting thought into something that could outlast the human voice. This was nothing less than the birth of written communication in the Americas, a bridge between the ephemeral world of speech and the permanent realm of stone and clay dot. The most remarkable example of this early writing system was discovered in a small serpentine block, weathered by centuries but still bearing its ancient message. The block holds a total of 62 glyphs, some of which resemble plants such as maize and pineapple, or animals such as insects and fish. This artifact, known as the Cascile block, represents one of the earliest attempts at extended written communication in the Americas, dating back nearly 3,000 years. As you drift deeper into this ancient world, envision the scribes working. By torchlight, their hands steady as they carved symbols that would carry meaning across the vast ocean of time. Some symbols were representational, showing the familiar forms of corn ears and fish, the fundamental elements of Olmec life. Others were more abstract, geometric patterns that encoded complex ideas about time, space, and the relationship between human and divine. The writing system served multiple purposes in Olmec society. It recorded the movements of celestial bodies, essential for their agricultural calendar. It marked important dates, the reigns of rulers, the completion of ceremonial buildings. But perhaps most importantly, it captured the sacred narratives that explained the world's mysteries, the stories that connected the Olmec people to their gods and ancestors. Think of these symbols as seeds planted in stone and clay, carrying within them the genetic code of all future Mesoamerican writing systems. The elaborate hieroglyphs of the Maya, the complex pictographs of the Aztec, all trace their ancestry back to these first tentative marks made by Olmec hands in the dim light of prehistory. The calendar and writing system worked together like twin rivers flowing toward the same sea. Time needed to be recorded, and recording required symbols. Events needed to be dated, and dates needed to be calculated. The Olmec created a sophisticated interplay between astronomical observation, mathematical calculation, and symbolic representation that would influence Mesoamerican civilization for over 2 millennia. In the late afternoon light, when shadows grow long and the day begins its gentle surrender to evening, imagine an Olmec astronomer priest completing his daily observations. He notes the position of Venus, the evening star, and marks its location on his calendar. This information will help determine the proper time for planting, for ceremonies, for the great festivals that bind the community together in shared celebration. The symbols he uses to record this information are not mere marks but portals to understanding. Each glyph connects the immediate present to the eternal patterns that govern all existence. The corn symbol represents not just the plant that sustains life, but the entire cycle of death and rebirth that defines the agricultural year. The fish glyph speaks not only of the creatures that swim in the rivers, but of the flowing nature of time itself. As the shadows lengthen and the first stars appear in the darkening sky, the astronomer priest carefully stores his observations, with the others adding another day to the great record of time that the Olmec people have been keeping for generations. This is how knowledge accumulates, how wisdom passes from one generation to the next, how a civilization preserves its understanding of the world's deep mysteries. The calendar stones and writing tablets created by the Olmec were more than practical tools. They were sacred objects, imbued with the power to connect the human world to the cosmic order. When later civilizations encountered these artifacts, they recognized in them something profound and eternal, a way of understanding existence that transcended the boundaries of any single culture or time period. The evening air carries the scent of flowering trees and the distant sound of water flowing over stones. In this peaceful moment, you can almost hear the whispered calculations of long-dead astronomers, still tracking the movements of stars that continue their ancient dance across the sky. The calendar they created continues to tick forward, marking time in patterns that remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. The symbols they carved still carry their message, waiting patiently for those who would learn to read their ancient script. In museums and archaeological sites, these glyphs continue to speak across the centuries, telling stories of a people who first learned to capture time in their hands and transform thought into permanent form. As night settles over the land and the stars emerge in their full glory, the legacy of the Olmec calendar and writing system continues to unfold. Every time we mark a date, every time we read a word, we participate in the ancient human quest to understand and record our place in the vast tapestry of existence. The Olmec were among the first to take this crucial step, and their achievement continues to echo through time, as eternal as the stars they so carefully observed. In the deep heart of the tropical rainforest, where shadows dance between towering cecropia trees and the air thrums with the whispered secrets of 1,000 creatures, there walks a being that is neither fully human nor entirely beast. This is the realm of the were-jaguar, the most mysterious and powerful deity in the Olmec pantheon, a god who embodies the ancient truth that the boundaries between human and animal, between earthly and divine, are far more fluid than we might. Imagine that as twilight settles over the wetlands of ancient Mexico, listen to the distant call of the jaguar, the haunting sound that carries across the dark waters like a prayer from another world. The Olmec people knew this sound well, for they understood that within it lay the voice of their most sacred god, the jaguar deity who ruled over the mysteries of transformation, fertility, and the shadowy realm between life and death. The jaguar was more than an animal to the Olmec. It was the embodiment of raw power, the apex predator whose spotted coat seemed to mirror the star-filled night sky. In the surviving Olmec archaeological record, jaguars are rarely portrayed naturalistically, but rather with a combination of feline and human characteristics. These were not mere artistic choices, but profound theological statements about the nature of divinity itself. Picture, if you will, an Olmec shaman in the hours before dawn, preparing for the sacred ritual of transformation. His face is painted with intricate patterns that echo the rosettes on a jaguar's coat, circles within circles that represent the endless cycles of existence. Around his shoulders hangs a cloak made from jaguar pelts, each spot carefully preserved, as a window into the cosmic order. Olmec art and iconography frequently depict figures believed to be shamans, adorned with jaguar pelts and masks, signifying their role as intermediaries between the human and supernatural realms. The word jaguar appears in Olmec art as a figure of profound mystery and power. It appears as a human baby or infant with distinctly feline features, such as fangs, almond-shaped eyes, and a cleft in his head. This infant-like appearance was not meant to suggest weakness, but rather the eternal nature of rebirth, the constant cycle of death and renewal that governs all existence. Sometimes this divine child appears limp, as if sleeping or dead, representing the liminal state between worlds that the jaguar god inhabits. According to archaeologist Peter First, were-jaguar figurines were likely used as household gods for many people and as spirit helpers or familiars for priests or shamans, aiding in transformative acts and other rituals. In the quiet corners of Olmec homes, families would keep small jade figurines of the were-jaguar, touching them with reverent fingers as they whispered prayers for protection, fertility, and spiritual guidance. The concept of the nawal was central to Olmec spiritual understanding. It was referred to as a nawal, which is an animal that is so closely related to a certain man that if the animal dies, the man will also die. The nawal can be the animal form of a god. This was not merely a belief, but a lived reality for the Olmec people, who understood that every human soul had an animal counterpart somewhere in the spiritual realm. Imagine the sacred ceremonies where this transformation took place. In the flickering light of copal incense, shamans would enter into trance states, their consciousness traveling beyond the boundaries of human form. Figures in contorted positions on monuments and in small-scale sculptures may represent positions taken by shamans to induce trance and transformation, or function as metaphors for the mental and physical rigors of transformation. Their bodies would twist into impossible positions, mimicking the fluid grace of the great cats as they prepared to journey into the other world. The transformation was not merely symbolic. The Olmecs may have believed that ingesting psychoactive substances allowed shamans to see, their jaguar spirit companions, nagels, or temporarily inhabit animal forms. Through the use of sacred plants and ritualistic practices, the shamans could literally become one with their jaguar spirits, experiencing the world through feline senses, feeling the power of supernatural strength coursing through their transformed bodies. The jaguar god is associated with the night and the underworld, embodying the mysteries of life, death, and rebirth. In Olmec mythology, the jaguar is seen as a protector and a warrior, often linked to shamanistic practices where jaguar imagery is used to signify transformation and spiritual power. This was a deity who ruled the dark hours, the time when the veil between worlds grew thin and the deepest mysteries could be revealed. The jaguar masks created by Olmec artisans were marvels of spiritual craftsmanship. Because of the value of the stones and the mastery of the craftsmen involved, it is assumed that these masks were commissioned for Olmec rulers or other high dignitaries. These were not mere decorative objects, but sacred instruments of transformation, carved from precious jade and polished to mirror brightness without the benefit of metal tools. When an Olmec ruler donned such a mask, he was not simply putting on a costume. He was invoking the divine power of the jaguar, allowing the spirit of the great cat to merge with his own consciousness. The mask became a portal through which the human and the divine could meet and unite. It probably captures a moment of transformation, of a human or deity into a jaguar. The spiritual significance of the jaguar extended beyond individual transformation to encompass the very structure of Olmec society. It was believed that the jaguar god served as a protector and guide for the rulers, bestowing them with divine authority and legitimizing their governance. The king was not merely a political leader, but a living embodiment of jaguar power, a bridge between the human community and the realm of the gods. In the soft light of early morning, when the mist rises from the rivers and the forest awakens with the calls of countless birds, imagine the word jaguar moving through the Olmec ceremonial centers. Its footsteps make no sound on the carefully laid stone pathways, for it moves between worlds, existing simultaneously in the realm of matter and spirit. The circular plazas and pyramid mounds were designed as sacred spaces where this transformation could take place. The circular voids formed by some of these figures may symbolize the portal to the other world. These were not merely architectural features, but cosmic doorways, places where the boundaries between dimensions could be crossed by those who possessed the proper knowledge and spiritual preparation. The word jaguar represents something profound about the Olmec understanding of existence. They recognized that identity was not fixed, that the boundaries between human and animal, between self and other, between mortal and divine, were permeable membranes rather than solid walls. In their worldview, transformation was not only possible, but necessary for spiritual growth and cosmic harmony. As the sun climbs higher in the sky and the shadows retreat into the deeper parts of the forest, the jaguar power remains present but hidden, waiting for the darkness to return. The great cats sleep during the day, conserving their energy for the night hunt, just as the jaguar god retreats into the invisible realm during the daylight hours, preparing for the time when the spiritual world would once again merge with the physical. The children of the Olmec grew up with stories of the word jaguar, tales told in hushed voices around the cooking fires as the stars emerged overhead. They learned that within every human heart lived the potential for transformation, that with proper preparation and spiritual discipline, they too might one day experience the union of human consciousness with divine power. The jaguar deity was also intimately connected with fertility and the life-giving forces of nature. The spotted coat of the great cat was seen as a symbol of the starry sky, and just as the stars guided the seasons and the agricultural cycles, the jaguar god presided over the mysteries of reproduction and growth. Couples seeking children would offer prayers to the word jaguar, asking for the blessing of new life. The ceremonial bloodletting rituals of the Olmec often involved invoking the power of the jaguar. Priests would use obsidian blades to make small cuts on their tongues or earlobes, offering their blood to the jaguar as a sacred gift. This was not seen as self-harm, but as a form of communion, a way of sharing life force with the divine being who governed the mysteries of existence. As evening approaches, and the forest begins to stir with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, the true power of the jaguar god becomes manifest. This is the time when the shamans would gather in the sacred precincts, their bodies painted with the symbols of transformation, their minds prepared for the journey beyond the ordinary world. Jaguar was not a distant deity dwelling in some remote heaven, but an intimate presence, as close as breath, as immediate as heartbeat. The Olmec understood that divinity was not separate from nature, but embedded within it, that the sacred could be found in the prowling grace of a great cat, in the mysterious patterns of spots on golden fur, in the fierce intelligence that looked out from amber eyes. The legacy of the jaguar god would continue long after the Olmec civilization faded into memory. The Maya, the Aztec, and countless other Mesoamerican peoples would carry forward this understanding of divine transformation, this recognition that the boundaries between human and animal, between earthly and cosmic, were meant to be crossed by those brave enough to undertake the journey. As the last light fades from the sky and the first stars appear like scattered jade chips against the darkening heavens, the jaguar begins its eternal patrol through the realms of dream and spirit. Its golden eyes watch over the sleeping world, guardian and guide for all those who seek to understand the deeper mysteries of existence, protector of the ancient wisdom that recognizes the divine spark that connects all living things in the endless dance of transformation and renewal. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world exists in that liminal space between sleeping and waking, imagine an Olmec master craftsman rising from his sleeping mat. His hands, weathered by decades of patient work, reach for the piece of jade that has been his companion for countless months. This precious stone, green as the deep forest pools and smooth as river silk, holds within its crystalline structure not just mineral beauty, but the very essence of life itself. The Olmec understanding of art was fundamentally different from our modern conception. They did not create objects for display or decoration, but rather crafted vessels for the soul, containers for divine essence, bridges between the world of matter and the realm of spirit. In Olmec culture, jade was not merely a material, but a symbol of life, fertility, and water, and when their artisans worked with this sacred stone, they were engaged in an act of profound spiritual communion. From the middle of the 11th century BCE to the Spanish conquest in the 16th century, green and blue-colored stones were esteemed across Mesoamerica for their exceptional luster and translucency. But for the Olmec, jade possessed qualities that transcended the merely aesthetic. Green stone was thought to be water-retentive, capable of emitting vapor that bolstered the growth and sustenance of surrounding vegetation. This was not superstition, but sacred science, a recognition that certain materials held the power to channel life force itself. Picture the workshop of an Olmec jade carver, nestled in the shade of cecropia trees near the banks of a slow-moving river. The air is thick with humidity and the scent of flowering vines. Water drips steadily from a gourd suspended above the work surface, providing the constant moisture needed for the delicate process of carving the hardest of stones. The craftsman works with tools of obsidian and harder stones, his movements deliberate and meditative, as if he were performing a sacred ritual rather than creating an object of art. Standing figure holding a jaguar baby, a statuette carved in jadeite, has been at the center of Olmec studies and the subject of scholarly interpretation since the mid-20th century. This magnificent sculpture, no larger than a child's hand, represents the pinnacle of Olmec artistic achievement. The figure stands in eternal contemplation, cradling the divine child that represents the potential for transformation, the seeds of divinity that lie dormant within all creation. The process of creating such a masterpiece required not just technical skill but spiritual preparation. The artisan would fast for days before beginning work, purifying his body and mind for the sacred task ahead. He would make offerings to the spirit of the jade, asking permission to transform the stone into a home vessel for divine presence. Only then would he begin the slow, patient work of revelation, as if the finished sculpture already existed within the raw material, waiting to be freed. The Olmec fashioned votive axes in the form of figures carved from jade, jadeite, serpentine, and other green stones. The figures have a large head and a small, stocky body that narrows into a blade shape. They combine features of a human and other animals, such as jaguar, eagle, or toad. These ceremonial axes were never intended for mundane use, but served as spiritual tools, implements for cutting through the veil between worlds, weapons for battling the forces of spiritual darkness. The choice of animals represented in these carvings was not arbitrary, but reflected the Olmec understanding of the qualities each creature embodied. The jaguar brought power and transformation. The eagle carried messages between earth and sky. The toad represented rebirth and the mystery of metamorphosis. By combining human features with animal characteristics, the Olmec artists created beings that existed simultaneously in multiple realms of existence. Jade represented intangible ideas, notably the concept of life, abundance, and regeneration. Because of these associations, jade was used in artworks that represented such ideas, either the entire work being made from the precious material or having jade inlaid into a less valuable material. The green stone was understood to be alive, in the most literal sense, a crystallized form of the life force that animated all creation. The masks created by Olmec artisans were perhaps their most powerful artistic creations. These were not mere face coverings, but transformational instruments, designed to alter the consciousness of the wearer and facilitate communication with the spirit world. The jade masks, with their serene expressions and otherworldly beauty, were carved with such precision that they seemed to breathe with inner life. The drilled pits and depressions found in many Olmec jade and serpentine carvings reveal a wide variety of bits, from extremely fine and narrow tips to broad and wide forms. At times, large hollow core drills were also employed, such as from sections of hollow bamboo. This evidence reveals the sophisticated tool technology that the Olmec developed to work with their sacred materials, techniques that required generations to perfect and master. Imagine the sound of the workshop as the artisan works, the gentle whisper of stone against stone, the soft splash of water as it falls onto the carving surface, the distant calls of tropical birds echoing through the forest. Canopy. This was not the harsh noise of industrial production, but the rhythmic meditation of sacred craft, work that connected the artisan to the cosmic rhythms that governed all creation. Figurative works in jade were being made by 1000 BC by the Olmec peoples of the Mexican Gulf Coast. Professionally excavated in important burials and caches, objects of diverse sorts came to light in the 1940s and 1950s at the site of La Venta. These discoveries revealed the profound spiritual significance of jade art in Olmec society, showing that the most precious works were not kept in palaces or temples, but were buried with the dead, ensuring that the life force contained within the stone would continue to animate the spirit in the afterlife. The figurines found in these sacred contexts range from tiny amulets, no larger than a thumbnail, to substantial sculptures that required months of work to complete. Each piece was unique, carved to capture not just physical form, but spiritual essence. The artists paid particular attention to the eyes, which they understood to be windows to the soul. Many jade figurines feature eyes that seem to gaze directly into the viewer's spirit, creating a sense of immediate and intimate connection with the divine. The value of jade went beyond its material worth. Perhaps because of its color, mirroring that of water and vegetation, it was symbolically associated with life and death, and therefore possessed high religious and spiritual importance. The Olmec recognized that the green stone contained within its crystalline structure the same life force that flowed through rivers, sprouted in corn plants, and pulsed in human hearts. The creation of jade art was a communal endeavor that involved the entire Olmec community. While the master craftsman performed the actual carving, the acquisition of materials required extensive trade networks that stretched across Mesoamerica. The Olmecs utilized their geographical advantage to establish extensive trade routes connecting different regions of Mesoamerica. Evidence suggests that the Olmec traded jade primarily through river systems. These networks were more than commercial enterprises. They were spiritual pathways that connected distant communities in a web of shared sacred understanding. The smaller jade figurines served as personal talismans, carried by individuals as sources of protection and spiritual guidance. Families would pass these precious objects from generation to generation, each owner adding their own prayers and intentions to the accumulated spiritual energy contained within the stone. Over time, these figurines became repositories of ancestral wisdom, connecting the living to the unbroken chain of those who had come before. The larger jade sculptures were reserved for the most important ceremonies and rituals. These pieces, requiring enormous investments of time and precious materials, were created for specific spiritual purposes: to house the spirits of important ancestors, to serve as focal points for community meditation, or to commemorate crucial events in the sacred calendar. When not in use, these sculptures were kept in special chambers within the ceremonial centers, tended by priests who understood their proper care and handling. The artistic process itself was understood to be a form of spiritual practice. As the young craftsman worked, he would enter into a meditative state, allowing his consciousness to merge with the spirit of the stone. The repeated motions of carving, the patient attention to detail, the gradual emergence of form from formless material, all of this served to align the artisan's inner being with the cosmic forces that governed creation. The finished works were not considered complete until they had been blessed in formal ceremonies. Priests would burn copal incense around the sculptures, chant prayers that invited spiritual presences to take up residence within the jade, and perform rituals that activated the life force contained within the stone. Only then were the works considered truly finished, transformed from mere objects into living spiritual entities. As the sun reaches its zenith and the tropical heat settles over the land like a warm blanket, imagine the jade sculptures resting in their sacred spaces, their green surfaces catching and reflecting the filtered light that streams through the forest canopy. These works continue to hold their spiritual charge, waiting patiently for those who understand their true nature, who can recognize in their perfect forms the eternal dance between matter and spirit that defines all existence. Legacy of Olmec jade art extends far beyond the objects themselves. The spiritual understanding that guided their creation, the recognition that true art serves as a bridge between worlds, that beauty and function are inseparable, that the artist serves as a conduit for divine inspiration. These principles would influence Mesoamerican art for thousands of years to come. As evening approaches and the workshop grows quiet, the master craftsman sets down his tools and offers a prayer of gratitude for another day spent in communion with the sacred. The jade sculpture on which he has been working catches the last rays of sunlight, its surface glowing with an inner fire that seems to pulse with the rhythm of a beating heart. Tomorrow he will continue his work, adding another layer of spiritual intention to the growing masterpiece, participating in the ancient dialogue between human consciousness and divine creativity that lies at the heart of all true art. In the gentle hours of early morning, when the mist rises from the river valleys, like the breath of sleeping gods. Imagine walking through the fertile fields of the ancient Olmec heartland. The air is soft and humid, carrying the green scent of growing things and the distant promise of rain. Here, along the banks of slow-moving rivers that wind through the coastal lowlands, a revolution in human civilization was quietly taking root. One seed at a time, the Olmec were among the world's first master agriculturalists, transforming the rich alluvial soils of southern Mexico into gardens that could feed not just families, but entire communities. Fields were located outside the village and were used for maize, beans, squash, cassava, and sweet potato. Based on archaeological studies of two villages in the Tuxtlas Mountains, it is known that maize cultivation became increasingly important to the Olmec over time, though their diet remained diverse and intimately connected to the natural abundance of their wetland environment. Listen to the morning songs of tropical birds as they celebrate the sunrise from the branches of cecropier trees that line the field margins. Below them, the Olmec farmers move with the quiet efficiency of those who understand the rhythms of the earth. They have learned to read the subtle signs that tell them when to plant, when to tend, and when to harvest. Their calendar, carefully aligned with the movements of celestial bodies, guides every aspect of their agricultural life. The foundation of Olmec agriculture rested on what would later be known throughout the Americas as the Three Sisters: maize, beans, and squash. By planting maize, beans, and squash together, the Olmecs benefited from the symbiotic relationship these plants shared, where beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, benefiting the maize, while squash provided ground cover to suppress weeds. This was not mere chance, but the result of careful observation and experimentation spanning generations. Picture an Olmec farmer kneeling in the soft earth, her hands dark with soil as she carefully places seeds in mounds that have been prepared with ritual precision. Olmec farmers planted their maize, beans, and squash together. The bean vines grew around the stalk or stiff stem of the maize. The corn stalks would serve as living poles for the bean vines to climb, while the broad leaves of the squash plants spread across the ground, shading the soil and conserving precious moisture. This agricultural wisdom represented something profound about the Olmec understanding of nature. They recognized that the earth was not something to be conquered, but rather a partner in the dance of creation. Each plant had its role to play. Each contributed something essential to the health of the whole. The beans drew nitrogen from the air and shared it with their companion plants. The corn provided structure and support. The squash protected and nourished the soil itself. Maize was their staple food, and since it was such an important crop to them, the Olmec even started believing in a maize god. This was not superstition, but recognition of the sacred relationship between human survival and the generosity of the earth. The golden kernels that grew on the tall stalks were understood to be gifts from the divine realm, seeds of life that connected the Olmec people to the cosmic forces that governed all existence. The process of tending these crops was itself a form of prayer. These offerings often included food, such as maize, beans, and squash, which were staples of the Olmec diet. The act of offering food was symbolic, representing gratitude for the earth's bounty and a plea for continued abundance. Before planting, families would perform ceremonies to ask permission from the spirits of the land, burning copal incense and making small offerings to ensure the cooperation of the invisible forces that governed growth and fertility. The Olmecs employed various techniques for harvesting different crops. For instance, maize was typically harvested by hand, while squash and beans were picked when they reached maturity. Storage was also a critical aspect of Olmec agriculture. They constructed granaries and utilized earthenware vessels to preserve their harvests through the lean months. This ability to store surplus food allowed Olmec communities to grow beyond the subsistence level, freeing some members of society to pursue specialized crafts, trade, and the complex religious practices that defined their civilization. But perhaps the most remarkable of all Olmec agricultural achievements was their relationship with cacao, the sacred tree whose seeds would become one of humanity's most beloved foods. Generally sought out for religious purposes by the Olmec, cacao didn't become a food of conspicuous consumption until the Aztec and Mayan eras. For the Olmec, cacao was first and foremost a sacred plant, a gift from the gods that opened doorways to spiritual understanding. Mesoamerican peoples had a long history of cacao, use spanning more than 34 centuries, as confirmed by previous identification of cacao residues on archaeological pottery from Paso de la Amada on the Pacific coast, and the Olmec site of El Manati. The evidence suggests that the Olmec were among the very first people to cultivate and process cacao, developing the complex techniques needed to transform the bitter seeds into the sublime beverage that would become central to Mesoamerican culture. Imagine the sacred groves where cacao trees grew in the dappled shade of larger forest trees, their pods hanging like jade ornaments from slender trunks. The trees themselves seemed almost magical, producing their fruit directly from their bark rather than from branches, as if the life force within them was so abundant that it burst forth from every surface. The Olmec understood this as a sign of the tree's sacred nature, its special connection to the forces of fertility and abundance. There is evidence the Olmecs fermented the sweet pulp surrounding the seeds into an alcoholic beverage. This early cacao drink was likely very different from the chocolate we know today. The Olmec would harvest the large pods, crack them open to reveal the seeds nestled in sweet, white pulp, and then began the careful process of fermentation that would transform the raw materials into something transcendent. The preparation of cacao was a ritual act, performed by specialists who understood the subtle arts of fermentation and flavoring. They would mix the processed cacao with water, creating a frothy beverage that was often served in specially crafted vessels during religious ceremonies. The drink was believed to facilitate communication with the spirit world, to enhance the visions of shamans, and to connect the drinker to the divine forces that governed the cosmos. Trade networks were essential to Olmec civilization, connecting their heartland to distant sources of precious materials and exotic goods. The river systems that meandered through their territory served as highways of commerce, carrying dugout canoes loaded with jade, obsidian, cacao, and countless other treasures. These waterways were more than transportation routes. They were the arteries through which cultural influence flowed, connecting diverse communities in webs of mutual exchange and shared understanding. Picture the scene at a riverside trading post as dawn breaks over the water. Canoes from different regions are moored along the muddy banks, their crews preparing for another day of negotiation and exchange. The air is filled with the sounds of different languages, the calls of merchants advertising their wares, the splash of paddles as new arrivals navigate the slow current toward shore. Cacao beans themselves became one of the earliest forms of currency in Mesoamerica, their intrinsic value as both food and sacred substance, making them ideal for trade. A handful of cacao beans could purchase a tomato. A larger amount might buy a turkey, and truly valuable items might require thousands of the precious seeds. This economic system was based not just on scarcity, but on spiritual significance, recognizing that true wealth came from connection to the sacred forces that sustained all life. The Olmec trading expeditions were elaborate affairs, involving careful planning, diplomatic protocols, and religious ceremonies to ensure safe passage. Traders would perform rituals before departing, asking for protection from the spirits of rivers and forests, making offerings to ensure favorable weather and peaceful encounters with distant peoples. The canoes themselves were blessed, their hulls painted with protective symbols, their prows decorated with carved images of guardian spirits. As these trading vessels made their way along the winding rivers, they carried more than mere goods. They transported ideas, artistic styles, religious practices, and technological innovations. A jade carving created in the Olmec heartland might find its way to a distant highland village, where local artisans would study its techniques and incorporate new elements into their own work. A cacao drink prepared according to ancient Olmec recipes might be served at ceremonies hundreds of miles away, connecting diverse communities in shared ritual experience. The knowledge of agriculture itself traveled along these trade routes. Olmec farming techniques, their understanding of crop rotation, their methods for storing and preserving food, all spread throughout Mesoamerica through the networks of exchange that connected the ancient world. Seeds were among the most precious. Trade goods, carrying within their tiny forms the potential for entire civilizations to transform their relationship with the land. As the sun climbs higher in the sky and the morning mist begins to dissipate, imagine the Olmec farmers returning to their homes after a morning spent tending their crops. Their hands are dirty with honest earth. Their backs ache from the good work of cultivation. Their hearts are at peace with the knowledge that they have done their part in the great cycle of planting and harvest that sustains all life. The fields they leave behind will continue to grow in their absence. The three sisters reaching toward the sun in their eternal dance of mutual support and shared abundance. The cacao trees in their sacred groves will slowly ripen their precious pods, preparing another generation of seeds that will nourish both body and spirit. The rivers will continue their patient flow toward the sea, carrying the wealth of the land to distant markets and bringing back the treasures of far-off peoples. In the quiet heat of midday, when even the birds seek shade and the world seems to pause in peaceful contemplation, the legacy of Olmec agriculture continues to unfold. Every ear of corn that grows in modern fields traces its ancestry back to the careful selection and cultivation of those ancient farmers. Every cup of chocolate, consumed anywhere in the world, carries within it the spiritual understanding of those first cacao cultivators who recognized in the bitter seeds a gift from the gods themselves. The trade networks established by the Olmec would evolve and expand over the centuries, eventually connecting all of Mesoamerica in webs of cultural and economic exchange that would persist until the arrival of European colonizers. But the foundation was laid here, in these river valleys, by people who understood that true prosperity came not from hoarding wealth, but from sharing it, not from conquering nature, but from working in partnership with its generous abundance. As evening approaches and the shadows grow long across the fertile fields, the ancient wisdom of the Olmec farmers continues to whisper its truths to any who will listen. The earth is generous to those who treat it with respect. The plants are willing teachers for those humble enough to learn. The rivers connect all things in the endless flow of life itself. And somewhere in the sacred groves, the cacao trees continue their patient vigil, guardian spirits of sweetness and abundance, keepers of the ancient covenant between human consciousness and the divine generosity of the natural world. The night deepens around us now, and we find ourselves drawn deeper into the heart of Olmec's sacred life. Here, where the jungle canopy forms a natural cathedral above, where humidity hangs like incense in the air, we witness something profound and mysterious. The rituals that bound the Olmec people to their gods, their ancestors, and to the very pulse of the earth itself. Imagine, if you will, walking along a narrow earthen pathway in the pre-dawn darkness. Your feet sink slightly into the soft, rich soil with each step. The air is thick and warm against your skin, carrying the scent of damp earth, flowering vines, and something else, ... Something sacred burning in the distance. Copal resin, perhaps, or the smoke of precious offerings rising toward the stars. As you follow this ancient path, the sounds of the forest begin to shift around you. The constant chorus of insects and night birds gives way to something else entirely. A low, rhythmic chanting drifts through the trees. Human voices, dozens of them, rising and falling in harmonies that seem to pulse with the very heartbeat of the jungle itself. The pathway opens into a vast ceremonial plaza, and here you stop, overwhelmed by what unfolds before you. Towering above you, a massive earthen pyramid rises into the misty night sky. Its sides are steep and precisely angled, built not of stone, like the monuments that would come later, but of carefully layered earth and clay. Each level was constructed with infinite patience, generation after generation adding to its sacred height. Flickering torches line the plaza, their flames dancing in the humid air, casting long shadows that seem to move with lives of their own. The light reveals intricate mosaics set into the pyramid's surface. Green serpentine stones catch the firelight, creating patterns that shift and undulate like living serpents climbing toward the heavens. These are not mere decorations, but sacred symbols, each one carefully chosen and placed according to cosmic alignments known only to the Olmec priests, dot at the pyramid's base. A procession is forming. Figures emerge from the forest shadows. There, bodies painted with intricate designs in red ochre and white clay. Some wear magnificent headdresses crafted from brilliant quetzal feathers. Others bear masks carved from precious jadeite that seems to glow with an inner light in the torch fire. These are not simply people preparing for ceremony. These are individuals transforming themselves into vessels for the divine. The high priest stands at the center of it all, a figure both imposing and otherworldly. His body is draped in a cloak, made from jaguar pelts, the spotted fur seeming to ripple and move in the flickering light. Upon his head sits a magnificent headdress, its central feature a carved jade mask depicting the jaguar deity. That mysterious fusion of human intelligence and feline power that lies at the heart of Olmec spirituality. As the procession begins to move, you notice the careful choreography of it all. This is not chaos or wild abandon, but something deeply structured, refined over centuries of practice. Each participant knows their role, their place in this cosmic drama. Young initiates carry ceramic vessels filled with sacred liquids, their surfaces painted with swirling motifs that seem to tell stories of creation and transformation. The procession winds slowly up the pyramid's steep steps, each level representing a different realm of existence. At the first terrace, offerings of precious cacao beans are scattered to the four directions, their rich, earthy scent mixing with the copal smoke. The Olmec understood what we are only now rediscovering, that cacao was not merely food, but a bridge between the human and divine worlds, a gift from the gods themselves. Higher they climb, and at each level, the rituals grow more intense, more profound. Conch shell trumpets sound their deep, haunting notes across the plaza below, their voices carrying for miles through the jungle night. The sound reverberates off the surrounding trees, creating an otherworldly chorus that seems to come from the earth itself. At the pyramid's summit, a small temple awaits, its doorway flanked by carved columns depicting intertwined serpents and jaguars. This is the Axis Mundi, the center of the Olmec universe, where heaven, earth, and underworld meet. Here, in this sacred space, the high priest will commune directly with the gods, seeking guidance for his people, ensuring the continuation of the cosmic order. The ceremony that unfolds is both beautiful and haunting. Jade ornaments are offered to the gods, their green surface symbolizing the precious water that gives life to all things. Rubber balls made from the latex of trees that grow nowhere else on earth are burned as offerings, their smoke carrying prayers upward to the celestial realm. But there is something else here, something that speaks to the more mysterious aspects of Olmec spirituality. As the ceremony reaches its crescendo, you sense an undercurrent of power that goes beyond mere ritual. This is shamanic practice at its most profound, where the priests serve as intermediaries between worlds, their consciousness traveling to realms invisible to ordinary sight. The very architecture of this place seems designed to facilitate such journeys. The pyramid's angles align precisely with celestial phenomena, its internal chambers channeling sound and shadow in ways that alter human perception. Standing here, surrounded by the pulse of drums and the whisper of ancient prayers, you begin to understand how the Olmec achieved their profound spiritual insights. As the ritual continues through the night, participants enter trance states induced by rhythmic drumming, sacred plants, and the profound atmosphere of this consecrated space. In these altered states of consciousness, they commune with their ancestors, receive visions of the future, and maintain the delicate balance between human society and the natural world. The jungle itself seems to participate in these ceremonies. Night-blooming flowers release their intoxicating fragrances just as the ritual reaches its peak. The calls of unseen animals punctuate the chanting like responses in a vast liturgy. This is spirituality that recognizes no separation between human and nature, between the sacred and the everyday world. As dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, the ceremony gradually winds down, but its effects will ripple through Olmec society for months to come. Decisions made in trance will guide the community's actions. Visions received will be carefully interpreted and acted upon. The cosmic order, temporarily disrupted by the challenges of human existence, has been restored once again. The participants descend the pyramid in the growing light, their painted bodies now streaked with sweat and ash, their eyes bright with the memory of divine communion. They return to their daily lives transformed, carrying within them the certainty that they are not alone in the universe, that they are part of something vast and sacred and eternal. And as the sun climbs higher, burning away the morning mist, the great pyramid settles back into silence. But it is not empty silence. It is the silence of deep satisfaction, of communion accomplished, of the eternal conversation between earth and heaven temporarily concluded, but never truly ended. This is the legacy the Olmec left to all who came after them. Not just the technology of pyramid building or the artistry of jade carving, but this profound understanding of the sacred nature of existence itself. In their forest temples, under their earthen pyramids, they established patterns of worship and communion that would echo through Mesoamerican civilization for thousands of years to come. And perhaps, on certain nights when the jungle mist rises and the stars shine particularly bright, those ancient rituals continue still, conducted by spirits who remember when the forest was young and the gods walked freely among their chosen people. And so we come to one of history's most profound mysteries, dear listener. As you settle deeper into comfort, let your mind drift to a time around 400 years before the birth of Christ, when something extraordinary happened in the misty lowlands of ancient Mexico. The great Olmec civilization, which had flourished for over 1,000 years, began to fade away like morning mist touched by the rising sun. But this was not the violent end that befell so many ancient peoples. There were no armies marching across the landscape, no cities burning in the night, no desperate last stands atop crumbling pyramids. Instead, there was something far more mysterious, far more haunting. There was simply silence. Picture, if you will, the great ceremonial center of La Venta in its final days. The massive earthen pyramid still rises majestically toward the clouds, its surfaces still adorned with those intricate serpentine mosaics that once caught the light of sacred fires. The plaza below remains vast and impressive, its carefully laid stones testament to generations of devoted craftsmanship. But something essential has changed. The torches that once burned continuously in honor of the gods now flicker and die unattended. The conch shell trumpets that once called the faithful to ceremony lie silent in abandoned temples. The great stone heads, those magnificent portraits of rulers and heroes, continue their eternal watch, but the people they once governed have begun their quiet exodus into history. Walking through La Venta in these twilight years, you would notice the subtle signs first. Gardens once meticulously maintained now show the gentle chaos of nature reclaiming its own. Vines creep slowly up the sides of ceremonial platforms. Bright tropical flowers bloom where once only sacred plants were permitted to grow. The jungle, ever patient, ever persistent, begins its slow embrace of human ambition. The workshops where master craftsmen once carved jade into objects of breathtaking beauty stand, increasingly empty. Tools lie abandoned on workbenches, half-finished sculptures gathering dust in the humid air. It's not that the knowledge has been lost suddenly, but rather that fewer and fewer young people seem drawn to learn these ancient arts. The sacred traditions that once passed seamlessly from master to apprentice begin to fracture, like a great chain slowly weakening link by link dot in the residential areas surrounding the ceremonial core, houses that once sheltered thriving families sit vacant, their doorways dark, their courtyards silent except for the gentle patter of rain and the rustle of small creatures who have made these abandoned spaces their own. Personal belongings left behind tell poignant stories of lives interrupted not by violence, but by some deeper calling to seek new horizons. But what caused this gentle dissolution of one of humanity's most remarkable early civilizations? The answer, like so much about the Olmec, remains beautifully mysterious, open to our imagination and wonder. Some scholars believe that climate change played a crucial role. The tropical lowlands where the Olmec thrived have always been subject to dramatic shifts in rainfall patterns. Extended droughts could have made their sophisticated agricultural systems unsustainable. Or perhaps it was the opposite, massive flooding that inundated their carefully constructed raised fields and made their cities uninhabitable. Archaeological evidence suggests that around 400 BCE, the region experienced significant environmental upheaval. River courses shifted, carrying away the fertile alluvial soils that had sustained Olmec agriculture for centuries. The delicate balance between human civilization and the natural world, maintained so skillfully for so long, may have finally tipped beyond recovery. Imagine the Olmec farmers watching helplessly as their fields, so carefully designed and tended, for generations disappeared beneath rising floodwaters. Picture the priests consulting their ancient calendars and astronomical observations, seeking divine guidance as their traditional ceremonies seemed to lose their power to ensure cosmic harmony. Yet there may have been deeper currents at work, spiritual and cultural forces that we can only glimpse through the mists of time. Perhaps the Olmec way of life had simply run its natural course, like a great tree that grows majestically for centuries, before gracefully yielding to younger growth in the forest. The Olmec had always been a civilization deeply attuned to natural cycles, to the ebb and flow of cosmic forces. Their art, their architecture, their entire worldview reflected an understanding that all things, no matter how magnificent, must eventually transform and change. Perhaps they faced their own ending with the same wisdom that had guided them through centuries of flourishing. There are hints that the decline was not uniform across all Olmec territories. Some communities seem to have adapted and evolved gradually, transforming into the cultural traditions that would later be recognized as distinctly Maya or Zapotic. The great colossal heads were carefully buried, not in haste or fear, but with the reverent attention one gives to honored ancestors being laid to rest. Sacred objects were cached in hidden locations, jade masks and carved figurines wrapped carefully, and placed in the earth as if waiting for some future awakening. This was not the desperate hiding of treasures from invading armies, but something more like a conscious preservation of cultural essence, a gift left for future generations who might one day seek to understand their ancestors. The final priests may have performed closing ceremonies, rituals designed not to summon the gods, but to bid them a respectful farewell. The eternal flames that had burned in temple sanctuaries for centuries were perhaps allowed to die naturally, their smoke carrying final prayers toward the stars. The great drums that had called communities together fell silent not from destruction, but from a collective decision that their time had ended. And so the Olmec people dispersed, not as refugees fleeing catastrophe, but as inheritors of an ancient wisdom seeking new expressions for timeless truths. They carried with them the memory of their great achievements, the knowledge of their sophisticated arts and sciences, the deep spiritual insights that had sustained their civilization for over a millennium. Some traveled north, bringing their understanding of astronomy and mathematics to communities that would later build the great cities of Teotihuacan. Others journeyed east, carrying their artistic traditions and religious practices to the ancestors of the Maya. Still others moved south and west, seeding the mountains and valleys with the cultural knowledge that would eventually bloom into the Zapotic civilization of Oaxaca. As you rest here in the gentle darkness of night, consider this remarkable truth. The Olmec did not truly disappear at all. They transformed, like water changing from liquid to vapor, their essential nature preserved even as their outward form dissolved. In every later Mesoamerican civilization, in every stepped pyramid and jade ornament, in every sacred ball court and feathered serpent deity, something of the Olmec spirit lived on. The great stone heads they left behind continue their patient vigil, witnesses to this mystery of civilizational transformation. Gazing out across landscapes that have changed dramatically since their creation, they seem to embody a kind of eternal presence, a reminder that some things endure, even when the cultures that created them have moved beyond our ordinary understanding. Perhaps that is the most beautiful lesson of the Olmec decline, that endings, when faced with wisdom and grace, can become beginnings of something even more wonderful. That the greatest civilizations live on not in their monuments alone, but in the seeds of inspiration they plant in the hearts and minds of all who come after. As our journey through time continues, dear listener, we now witness one of history's most beautiful phenomena, the way a great civilization never truly dies, but lives on in the hearts, minds, and very souls of those who come after. Like underground rivers that flow unseen for miles before emerging as crystal springs in distant valleys, the essence of Olmec wisdom flowed through the centuries, nourishing civilizations that would rise to even greater heights. Close your eyes and let your imagination drift forward through time, past the gentle silence that settled over the abandoned Olmec cities, past decades and centuries of change, until we arrive at the golden age of the Maya, nearly 1,000 years later. Here, in the magnificent cities of Tikal, Palenque, and Chichén Itzá, we discover something remarkable. The Olmec had never really left at all. Walk with me through the great plaza of Tikal in its prime. Around 600 CE, the towering pyramids reach toward the sky with an ambition that would have made the Olmec builders proud. But look more closely at the intricate carvings that adorn these monuments, and you will see faces that seem strangely familiar. The distinctive features, the elaborate headdresses, the ceremonial poses, they echo the artistic traditions first perfected by Olmec sculptors over 1,000 years earlier. The Maya scribes, those keepers of the most sophisticated writing system in the ancient Americas, worked with symbols and concepts that had their roots in Olmec innovation. The very idea of recording time, of tracking the movements of celestial bodies, of preserving important events in permanent form, all of this began with those first Olmec priest astronomers who watched the stars from their earthen pyramids and recognized patterns in the cosmic dance above in the Maya ball courts, where ritual games determined the fate of communities and individuals. The rubber balls still bounced with the same sacred purpose the Olmec had first invested in them. The courts themselves, with their sloping walls and precise acoustics, followed architectural principles first developed in the swampy lowlands, where the Olmec had turned sport into spiritual practice. But perhaps nowhere is the Olmec legacy more beautifully preserved than in Maya religious thought. The feathered serpent deity that the Maya called Kukulkan bears an unmistakable resemblance to the serpentine gods the Olmec had worshipped. The concept of rulers as divine intermediaries, capable of communicating with gods and ancestors, flows directly from Olmec political and spiritual traditions. The Maya creation myth, preserved in their sacred book, the Popol Vuh, tells of gods who shaped humans from maize, that most precious of grains. This deep reverence for corn as not merely food, but as the very substance of human life, reflects agricultural and spiritual insights. First developed by the Olmec farmers, who transformed wild teosinte into the foundation of Mesoamerican civilization. Now, let your mind journey further north and forward in time, to the great island city of Tenochtitlan, jewel of the Aztec Empire. Here, in the early 16th century, just before the arrival of European conquistadors, we find another magnificent flowering of traditions that trace their roots back to those misty Olmec origins. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma, clothed in feathers and jade, conducting ceremonies atop the Great Pyramid Temple, moves through rituals that would have been recognizable to an Olmec priest. The same jade that the Olmec valued above gold still adorns the most sacred objects in Aztec temples. The same cacao that the Olmec first cultivated still flows as chocolate drinks at royal banquets, still serves as currency in the great markets of Tlatelolco. The Aztec calendar stone, that magnificent sculpture that captures the cyclical nature of time and cosmic order, represents mathematical and astronomical knowledge that began with Olmec observations of celestial phenomena. The very concept of time as cyclical rather than linear, of history as a series of great ages that rise and fall like the seasons, reflects a worldview that the Olmec first articulated in stone and ritual dot in the Chinampas, those floating gardens. That fed the great city of Tenochtitlan. We see agricultural techniques that evolved from the raised field systems the Olmec developed to farm their flood-prone homeland. The same intimate understanding of water management, of working with rather than against natural flooding patterns, sustained both civilizations across the centuries. The Aztec tribute system, that vast network of trade and taxation that bound together an empire stretching from coast to coast, followed trade routes first established by Olmec merchants. The precious objects that flowed into Tenochtitlan jade from Guatemala, obsidian from central Mexico, cacao from the tropical lowlands traveled paths that Olmec traders had walked over a millennium earlier. But the Olmec legacy lives on in more than just material culture and political organization. In the Aztec understanding of duality, of the constant interplay between opposing forces that maintains cosmic balance, we hear echoes of the Olmec word jaguar, that mysterious fusion of human and animal, civilized and wild, earthly and divine. Aztec practice of human sacrifice, which so horrified Spanish conquistadors, must be understood within this deeper context of cosmic maintenance and spiritual reciprocity that the Olmec first developed. Both civilizations understood that human beings had responsibilities to the gods who had created them, that the continuation of the universe itself required active human participation in sacred cycles of death and renewal, even in their art. The Aztecs preserved Olmec sensibilities, transformed by centuries of cultural evolution. The massive stone sculptures that filled their temples and plazas carried forward the Olmec tradition of monumental art as religious expression. The intricate featherwork that adorned their ceremonial costumes reflected the same attention to natural materials and symbolic meaning that characterized Olmec jade carving. The Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortes, writing to his king about the wonders of Tenochtitlan, described artistic and architectural achievements that would have been impossible without the foundational innovations of the Olmec. The city planning, the temple architecture, the sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering, all of. These traced their lineage back to those first great builders in the tropical lowlands. But perhaps the most profound Olmec legacy lies in something more subtle, more spiritual. In both Maya and Aztec thought, we find a deep understanding of human beings as part of a larger cosmic order, responsible for maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. This sense of cosmic citizenship, of humans as active participants in universal processes rather than mere observers, represents perhaps the greatest gift the Olmec gave to the world. The Maya concept of K'inich, the divine spark within each human being, echoes the Olmec understanding of spiritual transformation, represented in their jaguar imagery. The Aztec belief in Tio, the divine force that flows through all things, reflects the same recognition of sacred presence in everyday life that motivated Olmec artists and priests. As we near the end of our journey through Olmec legacy, consider this remarkable truth. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered these magnificent civilizations, they were witnessing not just the achievements of the Maya and Aztec peoples, but the culmination of cultural traditions that stretched back over 2 millennia to those first great innovators in the Gulf Coast lowlands. The blood that flowed in Maya and Daya and Tayan Aztec veins carried more than genetic heritage from their Olmec ancestors. It carried cultural DNA, spiritual understanding, artistic vision, and technological knowledge that had been passed down through countless generations, like a sacred flame that never dies but only transforms as it illuminates new possibilities. And so the Olmec, who seemed to vanish so mysteriously around 400 BCE, were present at every great moment in Mesoamerican history that followed. They were there when Maya astronomers calculated the movements of Venus with stunning accuracy. They were there when Aztec engineers built their great city on a lake. They were there in every ball game, every ritual sacrifice, every piece of jade jewelry, every chocolate drink shared among friends. In this way, the Olmec achieved a kind of immortality that no conqueror could destroy, no natural disaster could wash away. They lived on not in monuments alone, but in the living traditions of their cultural descendants, in the beating hearts of civilizations that carried their legacy forward through time. And so, dear listener, as the night settles deeper around us and our long journey through time draws to its gentle close, we find ourselves back where we began, in the humid darkness of the Gulf Coast lowlands, where the story of the Olmec first whispered itself into existence over 3,000 years ago. The moon has risen high above the forest canopy now, its silver light filtering through the leaves to touch the earth below with an otherworldly glow. Somewhere in this misty landscape, perhaps not so very far from where you now rest in comfort, one of those magnificent colossal heads sits in patient vigil, just as it has for countless centuries. Picture it there in the moonlight, 17 feet tall, weighing as much as a small house, its features carved with such skill and devotion that even after all these millennia, you can still see the intelligence in its eyes, the strength in its jaw, the quiet dignity that radiates from every carefully sculpted line. This is not merely stone shaped by human hands, but something far more profound, a bridge between worlds, a messenger from an age when humans first learned to capture the eternal in the temporal. The forest around this ancient guardian pulses with life. Night-blooming cereus flowers open their magnificent white petals to the moonlight, filling the air with their intoxicating fragrance. Somewhere in the distance, a jaguar calls, its voice carrying across the landscape like an echo from the time when these great cats were gods walking among mortals. The sound of water, always present in this land of rivers and wetlands, provides a gentle rhythm that seems to match the beating of your own heart as you settle deeper into rest. What would this stone witness tell us if it could speak? What stories would flow from those carved lips if they could move once more? Perhaps it would tell us of the day it was carved, of the master sculptor who worked for months to free its form from the raw basalt, guided by visions of the ruler or hero or ancestor. It was meant to honor. Perhaps it would speak of the hundreds of people who labored to transport it from the quarry to its final resting place, their songs echoing through the forest as they worked together on this monumental act of devotion. It might tell us of the ceremonies it witnessed, the countless rituals performed in its presence as generations of Olmec people sought guidance from their ancestors and gods. The scent of copal incense, the sound of conch shell trumpets, the intricate dances that wove stories of creation and transformation into living art. All of this and more unfolded before its unwavering gaze. Or perhaps it would speak of quieter moments, children playing in its shadow while their parents worked in nearby fields, lovers meeting secretly in the moonlight that pooled around its base, elders gathering to share stories and wisdom as the day's heat gave way to evening's gentle cooling. For this monument was never meant to stand apart from daily life, but to be woven into the very fabric of community existence. The stone head would have watched as the great Olmec civilization reached its heights of achievement, and then, with the same patient observation, witnessed its gentle transformation into something new. It saw the last priests perform their closing ceremonies, watched the final families pack their possessions, and begin their journeys to new horizons, observed as the jungle slowly began its embrace of the abandoned plazas and temples. But perhaps, most remarkably, our stone witness continued its vigil through all the centuries that followed, a silent keeper of memory in a world that seemed to have forgotten the greatness that once flourished here. It watched as new peoples passed through the land, as Spanish conquistadors marched past unseeing, as colonial settlements rose and fell, as modern Mexico took shape around the ancient mystery of its presence. And finally, it would tell us of the moment of rediscovery, when archaeologists first glimpsed its massive form through the jungle growth, when scholars began to piece together the story of the civilization that created it, when the world began to remember once again the profound achievements of these earliest Americans who built their monuments not for conquest, but for communion with the divine. Tonight, as you rest in peaceful darkness, that great stone head continues its eternal watch. The same stars that guided Olmec astronomers in their calculations shine down upon it. The same moon that witnessed their ceremonies casts its light across features carved with love and reverence by hands that turned to dust millennia ago. And perhaps, in the gentle stirring of night breezes through the forest, in the distant call of tropical birds, in the whisper of leaves against stone, you can still hear the voices of the Olmec people themselves. Not gone, not truly vanished, but transformed into something larger than any single civilization, something that flows like an underground river through all of human history. Their gift to us was not merely the invention of writing or the calendar, not simply the development of agriculture or the creation of monumental art, though all of these achievements deserve our wonder and gratitude. Their greatest gift was something more subtle and more profound, the understanding that human beings are capable of creating beauty that transcends the limitations of time, wisdom that outlasts the civilizations that birth it, and connections with the divine that make even our briefest lives part of something eternal. In every stepped pyramid that rises toward the sky, in every piece of jade carved with loving precision, in every cacao bean that carries within it the promise of transformation. From bitter to sweet, in every ball court where play becomes prayer, the Olmec spirit lives on. Their blood flows not just in the veins of their direct descendants, but in the cultural DNA of everyone who has ever sought to create something beautiful, to understand something profound, to connect with something larger than themselves. As you drift now toward sleep, carry with you this gentle truth. We are all inheritors of the Olmec legacy. In our desire to create beauty, in our quest for understanding, in our recognition that human life has sacred dimensions, we participate in traditions that began in those misty lowlands over 3,000 years ago. the great stone head sits. In moonlight, patient and eternal, a reminder that some things endure beyond the rise and fall of empires, beyond the changing of seasons and centuries. It waits there still, holding space for wonder, maintaining vigil for mystery, keeping faith with the eternal human quest to touch something larger than ourselves. And in that faith, in that patient watching, in that eternal remembering, we find our own rest. For we too are part of this great continuity, this flowing river of human aspiration and achievement that began with the Olmec and continues through us into futures we can barely imagine. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with jade and calm. Moonlight, with the whisper of ancient wisdom and the promise of eternal connection to all who have come before and all who will come after. The stone heads keep their watch, the forest holds its peace, and in the quiet darkness, the eternal conversation between earth and heaven continues, just as it has since the beginning of time. Rest well, knowing that you are part of something magnificent, something that began with those first great builders in the mists of prehistory and continues through every moment of wonder, every act of creation, every recognition of the sacred that flows through ordinary life like moonlight, through leaves, like memory through stone, like love through time itself.